Good morning, this beautiful sunny day, a little bit chilly out today. Today, over the last few weeks, we've been talking about the experiences that Jesus's disciples had after he died and about the early church. Now, today's story that we're going to be reading happened approximately 40 days after Easter morning. Now, the disciples had had some pretty amazing experiences in those 40 days, as you know. And what do you think during those days, what do you think they might have feared? What do you think they might have hoped for? Today, we're going to be reading about another experience that the disciples had with Jesus, their last one essentially, and this is about Jesus's ascension. So we're going to read about it from Acts verse 1, chapter 1, verses 6 through 11. As a result, those who had gathered together asked Jesus, "Lord, are you going to restore the kingdom of Israel now?" Jesus replied, "It isn't for you to know the time or seasons that the Father has set by his own authority. Rather, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witness in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the end of the earth." After Jesus said these things, as they were watching, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. While he was going away, and as they were staring towards heaven, suddenly two men in white robes stood next to them. They said, "Galileans, why are you standing here looking towards heaven? This is Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven. This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way that you saw him go into heaven." Oops, my sunlight's wreaking havoc with the light on my video here, isn't it? So the book of Acts begins with Jesus's ascension into heaven, signifying that Jesus's time with the disciples has come to an end. Now, the disciples at this time are still wondering if the people will regain power from the Romans. Jesus tells, as evidenced in their question that they asked Jesus in this passage. Jesus tells the disciples that the kingdom of heaven will come in God's own time. He also says that they will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon them, and that they will bear witness about all that has happened to the whole world. After he's taken up into heaven, the disciples gather in a room in Jerusalem where they spend their time in prayer. And reading this text, there's a real sense of building urgency about what's next. And that's really the question that's underneath it. The disciples are about to start on a new way without Jesus's presence to guide them. This is a whole new thing for them. So they must have been filled with wonder and curiosity about what lay ahead, but also probably some worry and anxiety too, because the path ahead was not a clear one, and there was much that needed to be discovered. So think about times in your life when you've been sort of facing the unknown. You're taking a new step in life and you don't know what's ahead. And that can make you feel a lot of fear, right? So maybe if you're graduating or if you're leaving one school and going to another school, not knowing, are there going to be people there that like me? Am I going to make new friends? How hard is the school going to be? And how hard are the classes going to be? Think about even just the end of a school year, even though you'll be continuing into the next year with some of your friends. It's going to be a whole new class and a whole new teacher and many new things to learn. Think about other times in life, maybe just moving to a new place, no matter what you are. I mean, how old you are, what age you are. Moving to a new place is always intimidating. My sister's been talking about moving she's currently in the seacoast area of New Hampshire, and she's been talking about maybe moving a little bit up the coast into Maine. And she was saying, but everything would be so different, even like the grocery store, everything would change. And it's hard to make that move because you don't know what it might bring. I have a friend that just got a new job. She was working in a job that wasn't really fully utilizing her skills. but it was comfortable, it was easy. So she stayed there, but finally it just wasn't very fulfilling. So she applied for a job with SpaceX, the big company in Elon Musk's company in California, and was so nervous about the whole process. She's like, what if I don't get it? But then she ended up, amazingly, she got the job and even got them to, it was supposed to be in person. She even got them, convinced them to let her work remotely for Maine. And now she's terrified. Now that she has the job, she's terrified. She's like, what have I done? I had this great job that was so comfortable. I liked it. It was easy, because that being comfortable, that it makes things kind of easy, right? And as soon as you leave that comfort zone, it's scary. And she's terrified about this new job. And she appreciates all this, is looking forward to a job that will better utilize and test her skills. But it's definitely a scary thing to step into something new and unknown. She actually told me a quote by a woman. It was, see if I can remember it. It was something to the effect of, if you weren't terrified, you weren't living life right. You weren't doing it right, because you should push yourself a little bit, but it's hard. So how do we deal with that fear? Well, even though these new things can be a little bit scary, they can also be very exciting because there's so many possibilities. They offer so much hope. So my friend, for instance, she was sort of depressed in this job. She wasn't liking it. This new experience, it gives her hope of new things to hope for, that could, all these wonderful things could happen. And the same thing for the disciples with Jesus, when he left them and it's like, now what's going to happen? They could hope for the future, and they could hope for his return. So even though those what's next moments can be scary, with fear, one way to deal with fear is to be hopeful about all the good things that could come. So I'm going to read to you, to end, a different kind of story about fear and hope. And this is written by a woman, writer Jessie Smith, and she is a PhD student researching and trying to find solutions to ethical problems in society. And she also talks a little bit about AI ethics, which I haven't read any of that stuff of hers yet, but I might, because it'd be interesting. But this was a story that she wrote about an experience that she had when she was traveling in South America, specifically in Venezuela. And here is her story. It was a Sunday afternoon. Dark clouds filled every inch of the sky. The cobblestone streets felt eerily empty. Most merchant stands had been abandoned for morning mass. Terracotta roofs soaked up the gentle drips of rain. Several blocks away, church bells clanged over one another in distant harmony. I sat on a park bench, slurping at a freshly picked mango, dripping the juices onto my dirt-caked trousers, traveling as I had been for months now, alone. A man approached me, pushing a styrofoam cooler on a rusting cart with his son in tow. He asked if I wanted to buy any water. A bit dehydrated, I bought a bottle and handed him 1,000 Colombian pesos. I asked him where he was from. He told me he was from Venezuela. He had left 3 weeks ago. Given the terrifying reality of what is happening in Venezuela, during my time in South America, I had been trying to connect with as many Venezuelans as I could. I've been seeking information from primary sources, asking about political unrest, welfare, safety, and most importantly, I've been asking people to tell me their stories. I asked the man to tell me what he could. He sat down next to me on the bench and began to speak. Every word was weighted with passion. He began to describe the horror of his old home. He explained that many children are dying, that violence is spreading, food is scarce, and medicine is hard to find. And hospitals can't get the supplies they need. He and his family fled to Colombia for safety, but at a great cost. He needed to work all day and all night to make enough money to feed himself and his family. He began to explain a bit quieter how devastating it felt to fear not making enough money during the day to feed his children and not knowing what was going to happen next. He explained how his son hadn't properly in weeks, but couldn't finish his sentence because he began to cry. The 11-year-old son looked awkwardly at the ground to avoid watching his dad's tears. The man apologized and thanked me for listening to him. Distraught, I reached into my backpack to try to offer more change to the man, realizing that I only had 10,000 pesos with me, which is about $3 US dollars. I gave him what I had, and he began to tear up again. He mustered up words behind choked speech and told me that I was a sign of God to him. I was a sign of hope and faith. He said that money didn't matter in that moment. What gave him hope was that I sat there listening to his story. I began to cry. I told him that I was no sign of God. I was just a person who had been born luckier than he had. I told him that at the core, we were both simply humans living drastically different lives, genetically the same, but separated by an experience of devastation that I will never understand. We both looked into each other's eyes, two individuals from different worlds, connecting deeply in the face of fear and hope. Knowing that I was out of cash, I asked him if I could buy him and his son some lunch. In shock, he nodded his head and gestured for his son to follow me. I led them to the nearest restaurant I could find that accepted a credit card. I bought them both cheeseburgers and fries and continued to hear his story. He spoke in rapid Spanish, and although I couldn't translate quickly enough to comprehend many of his words, his eyes told me tales that language couldn't. Through the tear-filled gaze that firmly held mine, I understood everything he was trying to say. As the conversation shifted, I asked him more about his family. When speaking about his wife and his 1-year-old baby girl, he began to smile. He told me how much he loves his wife and how smart his little girl is. He finally fondly recounted the memory of how he and his wife met in college. They had both been engineering students. Together, they started a successful lighting business with their degrees. He gestured towards his leg to show me the insignia of their business stitched into the hem of his pants and began to tear up again. He explained that his business couldn't operate anymore given the crisis in Venezuela. Fleeing the country meant leaving everything behind. Rain began to pour outside as our conversation continued in the empty restaurant. The man mentioned to me how fortunate he felt for us to have crossed paths. His speech grew in passion and strength until suddenly he began to sing. A beautiful tenor filled the corners of the silent space. Gentle vibrato layered the sound of the pouring rain outside. He sang song after song, reciting beautiful verses of hope and resilience. As he sang, he smiled and laughed, his heart lifting with each resounding note. When he finished, we all shared smiles and laughs with each other. I thanked him for sharing his story with me. He told me that this moment rekindled a sense of hope for him. He had faith that the future would be okay, even though it was unknown. What he didn't know was that his presence had made a profound impact on me. His hope in the face of fear provided perspective that gave me a feeling of deep gratitude for my irrefutable luck. I hugged him and his son goodbye and began walking through the empty cobblestone streets, the pouring rain hiding tears on my cheeks. So I thought that was quite a beautiful story about having hope about the future, even in spite of fear and not knowing what's next. And that is all for this week. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.